I'm Tory Johnson, and this is At Work. From new grads looking for their first position to seasoned professionals aiming to move up in their field, we've got advice that will give every job seeker a boost from a guy who knows. Career coach and headhunter Mike Junge is here to tell us how to get hired. Hey there, Mike.
Hey, Tory, how are you?
I'm great. So there's a whole lot of buzz right now. I think we've heard it for quite some time now about the use of social networks in a job search. And we're hearing now that perhaps some of that hype may not be so justified, at least not yet.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So there's been a ton of talk about social media in the job space, but the data so far really doesn't support it being a significant source of hiring. I was just looking at the 11th Annual Career Crossroads Survey, which showed that about 3.5% of hiring in 2011 came in through social media. And what was interesting to me about that is that actually included LinkedIn, which I admit is a little bit harder to categorize, but is probably closer to a professional network or job board than a true social media in the way that we normally think of social media.
So before, though, we think that it's okay to just abandon it because that percentage that's being reported is so small, there's definite value to making those social connections online, especially if it's done right. Like, don't sign off and abandon your account so quickly.
No, definitely not. In fact, there's a lot that I think happens that doesn't necessarily hit the numbers, but can still be contributing in a positive way to a job search. Social media is a great way, for example, to mobilize a personal network in your job search, to let them know that you're looking and perhaps offer help, guidance, connections. It's also an incredibly effective way to make new connections. I mean, it's amazing to be able to just sit down at a computer and have access to people literally across the world. So there's definitely still value in the social space.
And a lot of times you make that connection online, but then you take it offline. And that's where ultimately the source of that new hire comes from. But it was the social network that enabled it to happen in the first place.
Exactly. It's online activity that generates offline activity that it can't really be tracked properly, but there still is an impact.
And so if referrals, which we hear so much of, if referrals are, pretty much the greatest source, routinely touted as the #1 source of new hires, it would seem that people then with the largest networks would be at a pretty significant advantage than those without much of a network at all. Do you think that's really the case? And maybe are there some trade-offs between the size and the quality of your network?
Yeah, definitely. So there are definite advantages to a big network. Going onto a job board or a company website and submitting a resume cold is a relatively ineffective exercise. But getting an introduction, even if it's secondhand through a friend of a friend or through an online connection, it increases the odds of a follow-up activity, a phone call or a request for an interview. So a big network is a pipeline into far more introductions, which can really accelerate the hiring process, or at least give you a chance of entering into the hiring process. To address the quality piece, so there's a big difference between an introduction and a recommendation. So an introduction is fantastic. It's far better than trying to do things cold, but it's not as good as someone being able to vouch for you, to be able to put their name and say, okay, I know this person, I trust them, they're someone that you should really consider for the position. And that's where network quality really comes into the play.
Sure. So it's a combination of both, ultimately, that matters.
Absolutely.
All right. Finally, let's switch gears for a second, and I want to focus on offline networking because there is still enormous value in some of the ways that you can invest your time that go way beyond for people who are out of work simply showing up at events that are exclusively for job seekers. So if you had to give somebody advice, someone who potentially does have plenty of time on their hands, what's the best way to use some of that time so that it's going to truly help advance their search?
Well, that's a really good question, and there are a couple things I'd recommend. And it's interesting that we've come back to referrals and offline because the Career Crossroads survey showed about 28% of all hiring coming from referrals. And I think it's probably about the 10,000th year of human history where referrals have been the #1 preferred method of finding new talent. So offline really has a big impact. And some of the things that I see that really make a difference ongoing education and training, certification courses, things like that where people are dug in to improving their professional skills, but also in a setting where they're meeting new people that are maybe in a similar track or may have similar connections. That can be really impactful. One of my very, very favorite things to see people do is contribute to not-for-profits and charities. There's tons that are industry specific and there are tons that aren't. But it's an awesome way to do something that's really useful and valuable while building relationships with people who then have a real sound basis for making a recommendation if the time comes.
Because they've seen you in action and they know what you're capable of doing. Absolutely. All right. Thanks so much, Mike, for chatting with us. I know we can get so much more from you by visiting your website, the book, the website. You've got us covered. So thanks for chatting with us.
Well, thanks so much for having me back, Tory.
Absolutely. And you can, as I said, get more job search advice by visiting Mike's website at michaelbjunge.com.